Hi, this is Stephen Roselle. I'm going to do a quick overview of one of the new bonus tools for time warping animation on individual objects. So what you'll see here is I've got these three objects, and if I play back the animation for these objects, you can see they're all animated basically pretty much essentially the same way with a slight offset along Y. So if I wanted to speed up or slow these down or change the rate of the animation, I can always go under Animate, and I can create what's called a scene time warp. So if I add a scene time warp, then that adds a single curve, and that single curve allows me to warp the animation. So if I were to change the shape of this curve by doing something like a flat out and a speed in there, you can see it slows down the beginning of the animation and then speeds it up at the end. Of course, I can do the opposite, where I can actually go in and I can speed it up here at the beginning, and I can slow it down here at the end. And now I've got the exact opposite of that, where it'll ease into the last position. So that's pretty standard. Again, that's a scene time warp, and that was actually introduced in 2011. But this applies to the entire scene. So this is upstream of the time node. This basically will affect anything in my scene, including textures, lights, objects, whatever it may be that is animated. If I delete this curve, then it will remove that effect for all of the objects. So now you can see I have my linear animation back. So what the new bonus tool allows you to do is it allows you to time warp each of these objects individually. So if I go under bonus tools and then under animation, I have a tool now called time warp animation, and it's very straightforward and simple to use. First thing I'll do is I'll just grab the sphere here and I'll just apply a time warp to that. Now what you'll see is I get a time warp curve applied to that. Now the default behavior for that is an ease in, ease out on each end. So you can see it's actually changed the rate at the beginning and the ending of the animation. So if I just isolate this specific time warp here, I can actually go in and I can begin to manipulate this. So let's say I want to slow it down, or rather speed it up here and then slow it down at the end. Now it's going to start out real fast, and then it's going to be very slow and subtle at the end. Again, that's on that individual object. So now what I can do is I can take a new time warp curve and I can apply it to this object. So I simply apply a time warp, and now I've got a completely separate curve here. So let's isolate that curve, and this time I'll slow it down in the beginning and I'll speed it up at the end, and I'll have kind of the exact opposite effect. So now I've got the red balls speeding at the beginning, and now I've got this kind of delay effect with the triangle or the cone there. So again, each one of these is using a separate curve. So another nice thing about this tool is that you can reuse curves very easily. So right now what you're seeing is the effect of my original animation on the green box, and then I've got two different time warp curves on the red and blue objects here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to isolate the time warp curve for one of these objects. So let's say I just want to use, actually we'll just use the sphere here. So I'll grab the sphere and I'll go into my hypergraph. So you just simply go into hypergraph connections, and that will just show you all the curves, and you can see that each channel is animated for that sphere. But right here I have a time warp node. That's actually just a curve essentially, but that's what's driving the time warp. So what I can do now is I can grab the blue box, and then I can just shift select that time warp curve, and now I can go in here and I could say I want to use an existing time warp curve, and I simply say apply. And now that green box is going to go at the same rate and follow the same time warp curve as that red sphere. If I wanted the opposite to be true, I could just simply undo that, and then I'll just grab this blue cone here and grab that, and you can see I could just grab the time warp curve that's feeding into the blue cone there, and I'm going to once again just select that as my last object and just simply say apply, and now that green box, or that green cube, is going to follow the time warp of the cone. So you get the basic idea how this works. So you can very quickly and easily create a time warp curve for a single object or a hierarchy of objects, and then if you want to repurpose that time warp curve, you can apply it to other objects as well, or you can have each object using its own time warp curve. So here's another quick example of how you can use the time warp tool. What you'll see here is I have a light, a point light, that's moving across this surface, and as I play this back, not only is it moving, but the color of the light is animated as well. So it's animating from red to blue, and they're following the same rate basically. So it's this linear animation basically. I think it might have an ease in, ease out, but at any rate, it's the same rate for both the shape node as well as the transform node. So what you'll notice here in time warp options is I have an include hierarchy / shape nodes. So this applies to hierarchy, transform hierarchies, as well as any sub-shape nodes, for instance, the shape node on a camera, which would contain field of view and depth of field, or the shape node on a light, which would contain the color or intensity or shadow parameters. So what you'll notice here is if I apply a time warp without that to the light, and then I focus in on this time warp curve, and let's actually just switch this to linear, and I'm just going to quickly flatten this out right in the middle. So I'm just going to add a couple of keys here in the middle, and then I'm going to take these and I'll just flatten them out to 45 or something like that. So now basically use the time warp curve to stop the light in the middle, but you'll notice the animation of the color continues. So you'll see there that continues to animate to blue even as the light is stopped. So what I want to do instead is, as I apply this, I want to include the shape node. That will make sure that any of the time warping I do will also affect the color animation as well. So I'll apply that once more, including the shape node. I'll just grab my time warp curve here. Once again, I'll just make that linear, and then I'll just come in here and I'll drop down a key here and a key there, and then I'll just take these 2 points and just flatten those out right in the middle. And now when I play this back, what you'll see is as it moves across, it will stop, and the animation of the light will stop as well. So once again, you'll see that the rate of the animation of the color, rather, is exactly the same as the rate of the animation of the position of the light. So again, this is important when you're dealing with things like lights and cameras. I'm also going to show another example of how you use include hierarchy for transform hierarchies like skeletons. So to give you a more complex example, we'll work on an entire character here. And if I frame in on this animation, you can see this is actually mocap animation. I got this out of the mocap library that comes with Maya now. And you can see I've got some timing issues where it's kind of slow in parts, and then he does this long pause, and I might want to use a time warp to clean that up, or speed that up rather. So there are a couple of little nuances here that we need to be aware of. One is that if you're dealing with a hierarchy, whether it's a rig or a mocap, you need to be sure to turn on include hierarchy. Otherwise, it will only apply to the single node that's selected. So I turn that on and I apply my time warp, and you'll notice that he pops down to the origin. That's because there's a frame at 0 where he's at the origin. And because the way the time warp is set up, it doesn't actually go to the first frame. So there's 2 things that we want to do. One, with time warp is we want to go in and set this to linear to start. And in future versions, I'll probably have it default to that. The other thing is it starts at 0, which was just an oversight. This should really be 1 and 1. So instead of 0, 0, we'll set this to 1 and 1, and that will basically match the first frame. You can actually have this start at any point, at any arbitrary point. The other thing you'll notice is that right now I've got it set to play back at 300 frames, but when I get to frame 100, it just stops. That's because that's where the time warp curve stops. So right now I have a 1-to-1 relationship. You'll see at frame 1, it matches 1. At frame 100, it matches 100. So this is mapping old time to new time. So right now I have a linear relationship, but the problem is if I go into view infinity, I have a flat curve. So this is another thing that I probably need to change in the script and will in the future. But for now, you just need to know that it's going to be flat on the out tangent of that curve. So what I can do is I can go to out tangents here. And I can set this, oh sorry, that's not out tangents. I want to go to curve, sorry, post infinity, and I want to set that to linear, and that will create a linear out for that, so that now I have a linear curve all the way across my animation. There I have basically 1-to-1 extended infinitely. So to really do this correctly, what I want to do is figure out exactly where my last frame is, which is right around here. And if I scrub through, I can actually just find actually I'll just use my timeline and then back to the last key. So it's at 286. So if I really want to encapsulate the entire animation, what I can do here is I can grab this last key and I can just set this to 286, 286. And now I've got an exact 1-to-1. So if I frame that curve, you can see I have a linear match, mapping my time one-to-one across the entire 286 frames of my animation. So this is where I can start to refine it at this point. So let's do a couple of things. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to kind of speed up this particular area. So let's play it back from the beginning, and you can see here that he's really slow in that kind of pullback right there. So let's just say from somewhere, actually let's say right in here maybe, I want to begin to speed that up. So I can come in here and just start to insert keys. So I'll drop a key down here, bam, and I'll drop a key down here, bam. So I've still got pretty much a linear relationship right there where you're starting to pull back. And actually I kind of missed that. Let's just find the endpoint. So right there. So I want to speed up between those two frames. So I'll add a key there. So now what I can do is, you don't want to necessarily move one key at a time. I just want to grab this entire range and keep that linear and just shift everything forward. So now the space between these two frames will be accelerated, or the time rather. So now when I play this back, now at that point he's going to pull back much more quickly. So I might even want to take this and kind of pull this back a little bit just to give myself a little smoother transition there. But I can just kind of go back and forth. There you see, now it's a much faster. It's much faster at that point. So I want to do the same thing here where he's actually pausing. So he punches and then he pauses for a while, and then right about there he pulls back. So right there where he lands his punch, let's say right there, I'm going to go in. I'm just going to grab my insert key tool, drop down a key right there, and then I'll scrub forward right about there where he begins to pull back, and I'm going to insert a key. And once again, I'm going to keep everything between these two linear, and I'm going to grab these and I'm going to start to pull those back. Now if you wanted to get this more exact, you could actually insert a key at a very specific frame, but I'm just kind of doing this visually. So now he's accelerated at that point where he makes his punch. So now if I play this back, it looks a little bit better. I've sped up the beginning of the animation. He goes through his punches, those are all the same, and then right there he lands his punch and then pulls back a little sooner. Actually, let's exaggerate that a little bit more, and he'll pull back even sooner now. And what I've done over the course of the animation is I've shrunk the entire animation by pulling out those little gaps, or speeding out those little gaps. So now if I take a look at the last frame here, I'm actually at frame 184. So I've taken a 280 something frame animation, or 70 something frame animation, and I've squashed it down to 180 frames. And I've only changed the rate of the animation at those particular points, and I've left everything else more or less linear. So it's just an example of something you can do with time warp curves. The cool thing about this, of course, is that it's isolated to this object. So could have, of course, done this with a scene time warp, but if I had other characters in my scene or other animations, it would have affected those too. The nice thing about this is it's a curve that is only connected to this character. And again, if I bring in another character that is supposed to sync up with this, I can use my Use Existing Time Warps option, and that will allow me to take this curve that I've already edited and refined and apply it to a second character. Alright, that wraps it up. Hopefully you guys will find that useful. Thanks. Bye.